There we go. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Build a Mind podcast. Super excited about this episode today. Will and I have with us Jon West. He used to be a consultant for Versi Consulting, and he currently works doing a bunch of blockchain and Bitcoin meetups. He is not a Bitcoin miner, but we're going to teach him a little bit about Bitcoin mining and see if we can't get him to agree with us or disagree. We'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, we're going to learn some things about Bitcoin. We're going to learn some stuff about Bitcoin and Web 5 development, and we're super excited. Well, what do you say? You want to do this?
Yeah, let's do this, man. I'm excited to talk to Jon, and yeah, he's got a great, interesting background. So let's hear it.
Let's bring him up. All right, bringing him up to the stage. There we go. We're gonna give him the front screen. Jon, you are now full screen, and we are recording. So tell us a little bit about your history and your journey into Bitcoin and Web 5. What is Web 5? Where did it come about? And how did you get yourself involved in it?
Sounds good. Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's an honor to get this podcast started with you and get it going. And it's really cool. So thanks. So my background or how I found Bitcoin, it really is it's a little bit unique because my journey to Bitcoin started before Bitcoin existed, and that's with the 2008 financial crisis. When that happened, I was thinking, okay, this should not be happening. I have no idea what's happening, and I don't think it should be happening. Something must be broken, and I have zero confidence that I can manage wealth long term if I don't understand and learn what's going on. And so that sent me down all sorts of rabbit holes for hours a day of global finance and central banks and government funding and interest rates and the whole bit. And, it was really the eye-opening discovery of financial cycles and, how that stuff works, and the fact that we're at the end of a cycle and it's breaking. And so these are just symptoms of what's happening. And then I found Bitcoin pretty early in 2010 because of that, and understood what it was trying to do fairly well because of the previous research, having also become a gold bug. But I poo-pooed Bitcoin for 5 years, said, no, I understand what it's doing. It's never going to work. And I didn't. And it was new and young, but also I hadn't completely understood decentralization and some of the technical aspects. So just watching it and learning it for 5 years, and I kept talking about the broken financial system, and people would tell me, Jon, you got to check out Bitcoin. And then finally in 2015, went down the rabbit hole with Bitcoin, and then volunteered at work to work in the space. Started working in the space 2016, and here we are. And then that kind of led to Web 5, but that's my Bitcoin story. But I can talk about Web 5 too now if you want.
Yeah, we definitely want to know about Web 5. I've heard about, Web 1, 2, and 3. I've never heard of Web 5 before, so I was very curious to know what that was, to hear about it. So just go ahead and give us a brief.
Before you do, Jon, I just want to share a little anecdote about Web 5. So when I saw that in your bio information and stuff, I immediately thought of Jack Dorsey, who the former CEO of Twitter, who I think jokingly, 4 or 5 years ago, referred to what he's doing at his Bitcoin company, Block Inc., as we're doing Web 5, because the whole buzz in the last cycle was Web 3 and NFTs and blockchain, this and that, and tokens and DeFi and all of that stuff. And that's all Web 3. The venture capitalists and Ethereum folks were trying to brand and market that. And so when he came out with some of the news around what he was going to work on at Block, very Bitcoin focused only, and he was like, we're skipping Web 4, we're jumping straight to Web 5. So it was like, when I saw that, I immediately thought of that little joke of his. And I assume it's not the same way you're referring to it. So
No,
Tell us what, yeah.
that's exactly it.
Oh, great.
It's the same thing. And it is a joke. It was a joke. The label was a joke, sort of. But yeah, there was Web 1, very easy for people to understand. It's read-only content. When the internet first started, all you could do was just read content on the internet. Read a company website that told what the company did. Then Web 2 brought transactions. So Web 2 was read-write, they call it. And the simplest example of that is, online commerce. Now we could order stuff. We could do transactions. But software moved to the web instead of the desktop. You could now use the web for transactions. That's Web 2. And then Web 3, they kind of added to that and said read, write, own. So the next generation of the web is supposed to be, okay, now you own your content, you own your data, decentralizing data and even software so that you're not beholden to large centralized services and honeypots of information that the bad guys hack. So decentralize the data, own your data, read, write, owns Web 3. And the crypto community claimed victory. The crypto blockchain community claimed victory on Web 3. And this is a big debate, no doubt, in the industry. And I kind of fall in the Jack Dorsey camp and the block camp of, the Web 3 tech stack for this is silly. It's, fatally flawed. It won't work. And so, so block saw that same thing. And interesting too, there's this whole nother set of technologies that have been being worked, for the past 10, 12 years called self-sovereign identity. And that's really a technology for owning your data. Your identity is just one piece of data that you want to own and control. And so what Block did is they just picked up that work that hundreds of projects and companies around the world have been working on for the past 10 years. So it's rather mature technology, but there were parts missing, and I think they're doing a really good job of adding to it. But so what they said is okay, take Web 2 plus 3 and it equals 5. And to your point, Will, let's just skip Web 4, and go right to Web 5, the answer, and skip this silliness. So that's the joke part. That's the kind of coy part or type of a thing. But the tech is really, I think one way of describing it is the thing that made the internet super successful are the open source protocols. And this won't surprise anyone. HTTP, SMTP for mail, FTP, file transfer protocol. Those protocols, are what made the internet so big because they were open. Everybody in the world could join the internet and there was no permission needed from anyone. It was free and open to join. And what that caused is this massive network effect, right? Completely unfettered, massive, as big as you can get, because everybody could join the internet, and there was no centralized party that controlled. Really, I mean, there's a few parts that ended up being centralized with DNS, but that controlled that, or that financially benefited from that. And the crypto world will understandably, and kind of rightly so, say, wow, if those protocols, imagine if HTTP had a token associated with it. That thing would be worth trillions in market cap. And it would have solved the problem of, we've always wanted money on the internet because you can fix spam. If you had to pay for transactions if they weren't free. That's all true, but the problem with that logic is that if that had happened And then people would be reticent to use that protocol because they're rewarding the token holders that hold that protocol.
Okay.
And so you're locking into a vendor. So you can think of this as if Ethereum were to capture, the Web3 protocol, then all of the Ethereum holders would be rewarded. That's capitalistic, but what you end up getting into then is then all of the companies say, well, do I want to reward that set of shareholders? Well, what else is out there? And then they do the natural, well, let's compare vendors because we're going to be doing vendor lock-in. And so that's the fallacy, that's the error with thinking that you can monetize these protocols with a token that has a set of founders and that has a set of shareholders. Now, on the other hand, you can monetize these types of protocols with an open token that has no founders, that's free for everyone to join and use. And that's, sound money. It's a sound money token. That's Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. Yeah. Okay.
And so it makes complete sense from that perspective, but it makes absolutely zero sense from, a crypto token security, even though it is a new kind of security, an interesting kind of security.
Still centralized, it's still controlled, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's even a little bit decentralized, but it's like, it's a set of people that hold
now
it.
Is this similar to how Gmail, Google, Yahoo kind of control the email stack? Am I kind of close there?
Yes and no. I mean, like the email stack there's an underlying protocol, SMTP,
right,
that is open. So that's why all of them can talk together. That's why you don't have to work, and that doesn't have a token associated. It's not monetized. That's why it works. Is because everybody will use it because they're not being captured by a specific token. And so that's what Block figured out is, okay, let's take this SSI technology and this decentralized web node technology from the Decentralized Identity Foundation. So what you have is you have a standard, open, free, no token required, standardized storage for each one of us. Each one of us now get our personalized storage database, and it's open and standard. It's on blockchain, because that's very inefficient, very slow. And then we get this technology for putting data into it, our identity data, for example. So a way to put data into it. Then we get these protocols on top of it. This is what tbLEND is, one of the things I work on. It's what TBD is, TBDEX, that block. These protocols on top of it that are like HTTP, like SMTP, like FTP. And so they're replicating the thing that made the internet so successful, HTTP, FTP, SMTP, but they're putting standardized, decentralized kind of storage mechanism and data exchange mechanism. So it's a data exchange on steroids, but it gives you, control, ownership, decentralized storage type of thing. So everybody can join these protocols without asking permission, without rewarding, a set of token holders, without worrying about vendor lock-in and that type of thing. That is, I think, the power of Web 5, and it's reusing things that have proven to work in the past instead of the fatal fallacies of Web3 crypto.
So you guys basically took Jack Dorsey's joke and made it into something real and tangible.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they're doing too. I mean, it's both a joke and a real tangible thing.
Yeah.
And there's other work being done too. There's work in the travel space. It's really things where there are lots of companies that need to provide services to the consumer that consumers do a lot. So travel, there's lots of services, whether it's flights, hotels, rentals, entertainment, all kinds of business participants. And it's a way for the e-commerce is another one, right? Like Amazon is essentially, not just, they don't sell, but it's an eBay, right? For businesses, for small businesses too. It's
Absolutely.
where lots of businesses want to come together and provide services. Well, as soon as you have, and lending is the one that I'm working on. There's Lending Tree. There's lots of people that provide, lots of businesses that need to work together to provide services to get a loan or to get a mortgage. But they all get captured by a centralized party that builds a network. And then that centralized party, like Lending Tree, it can, because it built the network and it owns the network where this happens, that captures the consumer, they can charge more rent. They can do the rent seeking. They can take a large share of the pie because they created the network. Apple is another good example. The Apple network. They take a very large, probably unfair size of the pie because they created the network, and no one has any choice. So how do you solve that problem? You essentially take their strength and you turn it into a weakness. It's like you create a network that everybody can join. No one captures, the network itself, and you use Bitcoin as the driving factor for the transactions and for the tokens. And then people are incentivized to join this because they can specialize in what they provide, and they can maximize their revenue and margin because they don't have to pay a network an unfair fee.
That's really interesting because, these are old debates, conversations. And John, you've been around a long time. I've been in the space for a long time. And so I remember on Bitcoin Talk and the early forums and stuff like that, people bringing up these kinds of ideas. And even, 10 years ago, people upset, obviously, at, Apple and its app store taking 30% of all in-app transactions. And, how do we break free from this? iPhone was already ubiquitous back then. It's just like, and these were the early conversations that we're now seeing resurfacing like 8-9 years later, which is really interesting because for a long time, all of these ideas were talked about in the altcoin circles, the crypto world, Ethereum world. They were like, well, we can fix this with our, many tokens and our, Rube Goldberg machines of projects that, are trying to design these incentives with a token, but they're just reinventing the wheel, right? They're in some ways, the centralization risk of many of those ideas and projects was to kind of create that lock-in effect, right? And so it wasn't very, it wouldn't allow users to kind of freely migrate or freely adopt, alternative technologies unless they were like very fringe. It's like, 5 years ago, how many people were using Signal? Very few. And now it's a lot more. There's a lot more, privacy consciousness on the brain with more news all the time coming out about spying on, on people and so on. So, and just data security in general, InfoSec. So yeah, it's just, for me as a longtime person in the space, it's really interesting to see these conversations return and center themselves around Bitcoin.
I agree. It's fascinating. And it's not even the business side of crypto that doesn't work. It's the technical side. And I find this just extraordinarily hilarious. And by the way, when I first started working in this space, I was, a blockchain head and thought it was going to change the world. And, and I still think crypto, the best thing we get from crypto is disruption of the SEC, which we need, type of a thing. And I think it'll be a new fundraising model. I don't know if you've ever read the FIT legislation, which passed the House, and I haven't read the latest version, but essentially what that does is it raises the threshold for crowdfunding. The threshold for crowdfunding is 12 million, something like that. Well, what the version of the FIT bill that I read, that's the crypto bill, it raises the threshold to 70 million per year. So it's changing and making it easier for startups to raise money, which we need. That's captured in by the SEC, and it's really difficult for startups to raise money, and it's not fair, and that's why big companies continue to get bigger, is because that's what the SEC protects. Now,
this is actually one of the really good things that Obama did, actually. You know, in 2016, I believe it was May of 2016, he signed the Jobs Act, which democratized and expanded crowdfunding opportunities. It was like a really good thing. And a startup that I worked at that time immediately jumped on that opportunity because we were based in the US, in California. We saw the emergence of these early token fundraising projects, which were touting themselves as, resistant to regulation. And it was very dangerous ways they were talking about their fundraising. And the largest raises in summer of 2016 were, people were very pumped up that they raised $400,000, $600,000 worth of crypto for their crypto project, the Uber on the blockchain and whatever else they were building. And we utilized Reg A Plus to raise up to $1 million from non-accredited investors. And I believe Reg D at the time was up to 5 million. And I'm not sure when this happened, but there were some additions to those crowdfunding provisions that increased those limits, but not to the level that you're talking about as in this FIT legislation. And so I'm a huge fan of democratizing and expanding crowdfunding, giving the average person who's not an accredited investor access to these, far less risky bets than the lottery or than Vegas gambling, but they're still very risky bets. But this is how these venture capitalists have and private equity and various institutions have just, gotten very wealthy very quick or grown their wealth like greatly. And there's a whole majority of the population that's sequestered off of these opportunities. In the language at the time that Obama was cutting through was we want to give these opportunities to more and more people, which was awesome. And so yeah, now the Democrats have taken a completely different tune, obviously. And it's just interesting to see the heel turn there. Why wouldn't they want to give more people, especially disadvantaged groups or underprivileged groups or minority groups or whatever they usually want to cater to, more of these opportunities? And now they're kind of closing that door, or trying to, with, what Warren and the SEC are doing. So it's much needed. And, it passed the House yesterday, I believe, by impressive margins.
Yeah. There's a trap there, though, for the average Joe. There's a big trap. And I think the easiest way to see it, I agree with you 100%, by the way, with what you said. The flip side is, we also know from a historical perspective that when you have sound money, that the average Joe doesn't need investments. They just save in sound money. Life becomes simpler and safer from a financial perspective. And that will likely happen again because history repeats itself.
Yeah, it lowers the risk of any investments they might make, because their core preservation of wealth is the use of, a good store of value, sound money.
Yep.
And so then, after saving a little while and seeing that savings grow, instead of fighting the uphill battle against inflation to try to protect any wealth you want to, any of your stored energy, the time you spent working in the nation's currency. And so, yeah, then with these democratized access to these kinds of opportunities, investment opportunities, people have there's less urgency around trying to find an investment vehicle for the average person. And so they can make wiser choices. Yeah.
But here's what big money is trying to do with this. And it's exemplified with the real estate tokenization stuff, right? So real estate has never really been securitized on a large scale. You have the REITs to some extent, but It's always, and part of the reason is they've never wanted to follow all the regulation to securitize real estate. It's a big hurdle. It's expensive. And they'll argue that the tech was never there either, which I don't necessarily buy. But so what they want to do is they want to say, okay, their biggest problem in real estate is exit. That they'll raise money, VC type thing, small limited partnership, and then the partners want to get out but they can't. They're stuck in it for 20, 25 years, and then it takes a long time to exit. So they want to tokenize that so that they can sell to the public. And then they word it as, oh, this will give the public easier access to invest in real estate. They don't have to come up with $1 million. They can invest in it $10 at a time. But what they're doing, make no mistake, what they're doing, just like an IPO, they're looking for a way to unload, because average Joe is still not going to get into the deals early. That's going to be big money, big money that's close to these deals. Very seldom will it be average Joe. They'll still have private deals. They want a way to IPO real estate and unload it onto the unsuspecting public. And they're wording it as democratizing real estate. And that,
right.
And the whole, even the crypto is like that with startups. They will argue that, okay, now we can give average Joe easier access to startups. What they really want is they want average Joe's liquidity.
I completely agree with you there. And just I guess a counterpoint to that would be, I'm personally very much a fan, and I saw this early on in my study of Bitcoin and, the emergence of, Namecoin and the kind of like pseudo equity of crypto fundraising and stuff like that, was that if this technology should make everything in the world that it can touch more liquid, and that is a good thing. But like you said, there's this kind of obfuscation going on by insiders and big money that wants to use these new terminologies and these new ways of describing what this technology can do, and still kind of have a closed system for themselves where they can benefit from their greater fools investment type of strategies that they like to use. So I'm curious, like the way around this, obviously, I don't know what you think, but in my mind is more direct to public initial offerings of these kinds of funding opportunities. So instead of having, pre-sales, pre-seeds and all these things, and then giving it access to the public, if it's a good enough idea and you have good ethics, you probably are designing something that goes direct to public immediately. And it's harder. It's a lot harder to fundraise that way as a founder or a creator.
Yeah.
But it's the ethical thing to do. What do you think about that, John?
Yeah, but I don't think it will work nearly as good as people think. And here, use the music industry as an example. So people make the same argument in the music industry is like, okay, we got these middlemen, the music industry that's taken a big cut when someone makes it big. So let's democratize that. Let's get rid of the middleman and create a relationship directly between the artists and the consumers listening to music, and let the artists put it out there and the consumers will pick what they want. And then the artists will get their fair share, the large portion of the payment, instead of sharing it with the promoters. Well, the problem is that those middlemen are providing a valuable service. If I wanted to make it big in the music industry, my chances of making it big going with someone who promotes me far, far, far outweighs my chances of making it big going it alone. Because there's 10 million, 50 million little artists out there trying to capture attention. And then you have somebody that's doing all of this marketing. And those people make it big largely because they're good, but they make it big because of the marketing. Marketing works.
Yeah, the whole machine behind them is a big part of it.
And that machine is taking the risk investing the money, they deserve
a cut.
They earn a big cut. Yeah, because now, you're getting a small piece of a huge pie instead of 90% of it just a teeny weensy beansy pie. And I think the same thing will happen and continue to happen in the investment world too. It's like, should the average Joe today invest in startups? No, they don't have the time to research. A VC has 50 people working 50 hours a week, curating a list of 100 companies. They're only successful 7% of the time. Average Joe will never do that. And so I think it's largely a trap. But I think if you have sound money, to your point before, and people start returning back to low time preference, and then they get more judicious about evaluating things, realizing, okay, if I'm going to put money here, I need to be very sure. And then it ends up being this, I really know this person, it's not just some random thing that I'm researching.
Yeah.
And being more selective, that works. But they shouldn't be just trying to invest in startups, because
I think what you said is a very astute point, and the music industry analogy is a really good one for this. And because what you're talking about is this double-edged sword, where the very expert level inside players, the big players, they can squat on these opportunities and kind of bottleneck the flow of what gets out to the mainstream, and how promoting certain artists over others, and so on. But there are some counter examples that I think are really revealing. There are artists who they might have gotten signed to a label and they put out a few albums with the label, but the real bread and butter, and they never relied on the label for most of their revenue and growth. So there's a few examples I'm thinking of, but one huge one is a band that's been around for 40 years. They've never been, today, it's not like they ebbed and flowed and they were popular and now they're just like a nostalgia act. They're 40 years on, still as big as ever. I'm talking, one of my favorite bands is the band Phish. And Phish was signed to Elektra Records, which is the same label that Metallica is signed to, right around the same time frame as Metallica signed there as well. And they put out some albums through Elektra and did pretty well in the mid 90s in terms of getting some more popular awareness around them. But they've made their money as a touring act, and they have this massively dedicated following that repeat customers, like on steroids, right? Mm-hmm. These folks go to 3 to 10 concerts in a given tour. Some of the fans travel all around and go to every concert on the tour. And this is one of the most successful bands in history, and they've not needed to use any of these middlemen, really. And then the kinds of innovations that they have done. So one example is, they went on hiatus in the early 2000s, and the first year of their hiatus, they consulted with the Bonnaroo Music Festival, which is now one of them. It's like Lollapalooza, Coachella. It's a huge music festival. But Phish helped those festival organizers very deeply launch the first few festivals that they ran. And because of their experience running their own festivals, they helped, the live music industry grow in this new kind of way. And so the reason I kind of went on that tangent is because I think the same thing is possible in the startup and investment world, but it takes a lot longer. It takes harder work, more dedication, and you need to be of such a quality, whether that's high quality or just a certain quality that draws in a growing fan base that's extremely dedicated to, super passionate, super users. And this, so it is possible. And these technologies, Bitcoin and everything that it inspires, it really, it's funny. I always think the Ethereum folks over the years have wanted massive shortcuts to the success that things like Bitcoin demonstrate. I mean, look at the year. I mean, Bitcoin's been through crazy ups and downs, but stepping up every several years, every 2.5 to 3.5 years, still growing on that trajectory. And I think the music industry analogy is a great one to kind of highlight these different examples from these different artists. There's a lot of pop music that's super popular, but it's not of very high quality, and it's still appealing and it still has large fan bases, but it doesn't have staying power. And after a couple years or, several cycles of being overplayed on the radio, it goes out of style, and it might, come back on your playlists or come back on the radio on the oldies hit station periodically. But for example, there's numerous musical acts like this. I'll just use the example of Fish again. They don't need the radio. They've never needed the radio. Their songs are played on the radio, but that's not where people learn about them and grow to love them. And they've really just bootstrapped, to use all these, startup world and tech world kind of phrases, to get where they've gotten. And I think the same will need to happen from any new innovation, new project, new startup. It needs to be such a good idea that it naturally acquires an audience or a fan base or user base, and that has staying power because of the quality of the product that the artist or creator is putting out. So I guess I agree with you completely. I just think it's interesting to kind of push back a little bit. There are some examples where this can work as long as you're willing to put in the effort and the persistence, really, to kind of and be good in general, like intrinsically good, intrinsically good idea already to attract people. So, yeah,
I agree. I'm just saying there won't be very many of those ever.
Right.
For two reasons. One, it's hard to do, and two, the world does not have the capacity for it. You can't adopt millions of those because people don't have the time to make millions of those successful. But anyway, Trevor wants to move on.
Yeah, we're gonna move on a little bit. I want to hear a little bit more about your experience starting, like, doing blockchain and Bitcoin startups. I think that'll lead us into our Bitcoin mining conversation a little bit. So you've started you've led two different blockchain meetups: the Dallas blockchain meetup and also the McKinney Bitcoin meetup. Bitcoin meetup, and then also you are the tri-chair on another Bitcoin meetup. So why don't you go ahead and explain that experience, what you do for them, and how it was building those startups or those meetups?
So in 2016, I worked for Thomson Reuters, big company. I volunteered. I said, hey, I'll dig into this blockchain crypto stuff. They said, okay, sure. So I led R&D, blockchain crypto R&D for 2 or 3 years, and then left and went on my own independently. But they essentially, it was fun. They essentially let me train myself in this space and play in this space and learn. And then I started consulting. I really got into when I volunteered at TR for those 3 years too, I really got into the local meetup scene, really got plugged into the industry, and networking and that type of thing. And started Dallas Blockchain, largest, most visible, most active blockchain meetup in Dallas to this date. But I also then started figuring out really, how what blockchain is. And I think a simple way of explaining it is it's the slowest, most expensive, simplest database ever created. Okay. And it needs to be for security and decentralization and money and that type of thing.
Absolutely.
But, and it's hilarious too that no one else wants slow and expensive and simple. Ethereum sure doesn't want it.
No, they want to move fast and break things.
That's why they moved away from proof of work and added, they added smart contracts, completely Turing complete programming language. And so you start to realize it's like, wow, slow and expensive and simple doesn't work for very many use cases. And so people start stripping all this stuff out that doesn't work, and then they still want to claim decentralization, Bitcoin, the good things that they've just completely stripped out, and still call it blockchain, and which it isn't. And just another simple example technically is like, I thought smart contracts were the coolest thing ever, just like everyone else. And then working on it and then realizing it's like, oh wow, this is impossible to scale. You will never scale running Turing complete code on thousands of computers. It just is impossible, right? Because the transaction, and even when Ethereum moved to proof of stake, the transaction fees are still high because the smart contracts run on thousands of computers. And then they start moving them off chain, and it becomes even more centralized because you got five computers running it now, which makes sense instead of thousands, type of a thing. So it's like going through that learning curve and that realization and understanding, what parts work, what doesn't, what's happening. And then that's the technical fallacy of blockchain. And so like then the question becomes is, will it be used for anything but money? And I actually don't think the Bitcoin network will eventually be used for anything but money, because the transaction fees will be too high. They're not going to pay for block space for storing. I don't care how many little bits of data it is. The question then is, will these proof of stake networks be useful for anything? And I think the way to evaluate that is, can Amazon provide the same services that they do? And Amazon does, by the way, quantum ledger database. And so if I'm writing an application and there's a part of my application that I don't want my customers to trust me on. I want to distribute that trust someplace else so that I can pass an audit that says, hey, yeah, you're not trusting John for that part of the software that's critical, because he's not going to rip you off. John is trusting the Ethereum blockchain, or John is trusting Amazon. I don't think my customers are going to care whether I'm trusting Amazon, Microsoft, or Ethereum. They're going to look at them as largely the same. So it'll come to me and say, what's the better, faster, cheaper solution? And the better, faster, cheaper solution is likely going to be Amazon to implement it. So unless something pops in this new blockchain world that defeats what I just outlined, then I don't see a big need for these blockchains.
So this is the research that you were doing while at Thomson Reuters, was kind of digging down into the brass tacks of what opportunities this technology could actually provide.
Yes.
The commercial world, the business world. And I mean, the conclusions you arrived at are, in my view, largely correct conclusions. Now, I do think in the future, there's a non-zero possibility that one day innovations and the maturation of the network and the maturation of hardware capabilities, we could potentially use the Bitcoin network for things more than money. But they will be things like, we talked to a guest on our podcast about how they're using open timestamps to help verify election audits. And so this is one of these like really low trust, high security, deep needs for society that a trust system such as the Bitcoin network can actually support and help with. But it's not really using the Bitcoin super directly. It ties into the Bitcoin network to help verify the results of these elections with open timestamps. But yeah, I mean, today and probably in the foreseeable future, there's no need for so many of these things to be pushed onto blockchains. You know, the decentralized Uber, the decentralized Airbnb. You know, people don't like Uber and Airbnb for various reasons. The solution is not to try and cobble together what they do and what the service they provide on a blockchain. And they've all been super clunky, and you know, they're fashionable as an idea, and then the implementation fails. Yeah. And because I think we're just in still relatively too immature of a time with this tech.
I agree. And I do think there is a possibility that Bitcoin network will be used for something besides money. But even the example that you gave, which is the right example, a transaction needs to be written to the Bitcoin network to do what you just described. And those transaction fees probably will be, reach $5,000, $10,000 per transaction, because Bitcoin, as the layer 0 of the money base, is settling really big transactions. With Swift, think of Swift. The big transactions and how much those transactions fees cost. That's likely where the Bitcoin network. So if there's a use case where people can afford that, and the more the more use cases there are, by the way, the more those transaction fees will be driven up. Then yes. Now the other thing is, I think, moving back to sound money, it will decentralize the world. The government won't be as big. Elections won't be as important. Elections won't be as rigged. Companies will get decentralized. And so trust will get decentralized purely because companies and government get decentralized. So we don't have these behemoths that we have to trust and that we have to have a tech solution to. And so will that then drive and say, you know what? We don't need this expensive trust mechanism, because it's happening more on an individual level, because trust is really, really, really hard to automate technically. As much as we think this technology automates it, it will get really expensive really fast to try to automate all the trust in the world.
Yeah, there's still so many challenges.
Yep.
One quick question that I just thought of off that. What do you think? So a lot of people are enamored with the idea of, decentralization, ownership of data. These have been themes since 2016 with the emergence of Cambridge Analytica as part of the election scandal, and these other kind of tech movements that have grown up around the blockchain Bitcoin industry. There is a need, a genuine desire for people to own their own data, or have at least the ability to provide read-write access to their own data, the content they create online, their identity data, their digital identity information. So do you see, like with the research you did for Thomson Reuters, did you come to any conclusions about how that might be accomplished in the future? Because I think these problems aren't going to go away until they're solved or somewhat solved. Yep. And the desire will only grow. More and more people will, especially Gen Z, as they grow up, they're going to want to own their own data more and more, and understand that, everything I do online at Amazon, with Twitch, or with Google and YouTube, I don't really like that they can just turn me off, at any point. So what did your research uncover about that?
Yep. So, no, that's a really, really good, insightful question. The key is what you just said at the end, the censorship resistance. And what I said earlier would have been better stated to say censorship resistance will become less of a need once we get rid of once big corporations, big governments are decentralized. Because it is very easy, actually, relatively speaking, to give you your own data. That's what the SSI tech does, the Web 5 tech. And you don't need blockchain to do it. And I can give you your own data, and I can use cryptography And I can, so like in tbLEND, we create an ability to pay score. It's sort of like a FICO score, but it's like it analyzes your income and savings, and it's like, oh, well, you have the ability to pay this much on a loan. We give you that. You can't change it because we sign it cryptographically and give it to you. You could change it, but if you share it with someone and they verify it, they can immediately see that you changed it. I don't need blockchain to do any of that. Now I can use, it helps me to use a somewhat of a decentralized system like Tor or the decentralized file server stuff that's going on out there and that type of thing. But that stuff isn't completely censorship resistant. And you really need money to be censorship resistant. Some of these other things, you don't really need it to be censorship resistant, so you don't have to pay the extra cost. And so to answer your question, that's the work that's going on in Web 5. The Web 3 folks will say they're doing the same thing, but they have a major problem, and that is, in Web 3, here's an example of one of their major flaws. If you have a criminal record, you get a speeding ticket, or something bad happens, or you default on a loan, in Web 3, they will say, I'm going to issue you that data, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. You have to take it, you have to accept it, and then you have to share it. Well, that means that then I could say anything I want about you, and you have to take it. So people can just make stuff up, and you have to take it. And Web3 has no solution for this. You cannot, in Web3, you have to take everything that's issued for you, or it doesn't work. And that is not something that'll work, because that's not how society works. It will never work. Negative stuff will always have to be done and held by the thing that figures out that it's negative, and then people will have to decide if they trust that or not.